What's going on, everybody? Kalipa's Tech here, coming back at you with another video. In this video, I'm going to be giving you 5 of the best 5G phones you can get for less than $250. Now, in this day and age, 5G is becoming more and more relevant, and while 4G is not going away anytime soon, if you want access to the 5G network and the latest and greatest technology, you're of course going to want to go for a 5G phone. Now, despite their advantages, 5G phones are typically thought of to be a little bit more pricey than the average 4G phone, but today in 2022, there are definitely some affordable options out there. So in this video, we're going to be going over 5 of my favorite 5G phones under $250 so you can get a better idea of what options you have. Now, if you want to learn more about any of these phones individually, be sure to check out my full reviews and tips and tricks videos for them on the channel, as well as various comparisons I have as well. But with that being said, let's get started. So coming in at number 1, we got the Blue F91 5G. Now this phone came out pretty recently, and I gotta say it's probably Blue's best phone yet. With this phone, we're getting a 6.8-inch LCD display with a resolution of 1080p, a PPI of 396, and an aspect ratio of 20.5:9. So we got a real large display here, in fact at 6.8 inches, one of the largest displays you can get in a smartphone. And in addition to this, we got good dimensions. With the aspect ratio of 20:9, we're getting a taller and more narrow form factor, and that's going to be great for content consumption. And if that wasn't enough, we also got a 1080p resolution, so we got a nice crisp image here. Now this phone has 128 gigabytes of internal storage with microSD card expansion, so a real great amount of storage. For the average user, you're probably never even going to have to think about storage, and even if you're a power user, 128 gigabytes is a lot, and you also got microSD card expansion here, so really no matter what you're doing with this phone, whatever you're putting on it, you're going to have plenty of space for anything. One of the cool, more unique features about this phone, especially for this price range, is that this phone not only supports 10-watt wireless charging, but it also has a feature called wireless reverse charging, which allows you to use this phone to charge any other phone that has wireless charging. And while of course this feature is pretty situational and it's not going to change your life, it's definitely a unique one that you don't see every day, even in flagship phones. Like for example, the iPhone 13 doesn't even have reverse charging. So if you're looking for a phone with more unique features, then the Blue F91 5G is going to be a good option for that. For security features, we got a fingerprint scanner right here on the side, works really well, super fast and responsive. And in addition to this, we got face unlock, so 2 options to get into it. Then for the camera setup, we got a nice looking hole punch design for the front facing camera. This camera is 16 megapixels. Then on the back, we got a quad camera setup with a 48 megapixel main camera, a 5 megapixel ultra wide camera, a 2 megapixel depth sensing camera, and a 2 megapixel macro camera. So this camera setup is real impressive, especially for a Blue phone. We got pretty much all the features here, so if you're taking lots of photos and you want a wider variety of features, then this is going to be great. Now for video, this phone can shoot in up to 2K in the rear camera and 1080p in the front, so not quite 4K, but the video quality is still pretty good. Internally with this phone, we're getting 8 gigabytes of RAM with the MediaTek Dimensity 810 processor. So we got a good processor here, and we got a good amount of RAM as well. Out of all these phones, this phone by far does have the most RAM. Now, in and of itself, is this going to really change anything? Probably not really, but having more RAM never hurts. And seeing that the average mid-range phone, whether it's 5G or not, typically only has 4 to 6 gigabytes of RAM, having a phone like this that has 8 is pretty impressive. Now, I ran a Geekbench 5 benchmark test on this phone, and it came back with a single core score of 576 and a multi-core score of 1692. So this is real good here, and in general, I haven't had any performance issues with this phone. Everything runs really smoothly, and despite only having Android 11 and probably not getting an update anytime soon, the phone is really optimized for the software. So if you're looking for a reliable phone that you can do pretty much anything on, from social media, streaming videos and music, to even a good amount of mobile gaming, the Blue F91 5G is going to be a good choice for that. For the battery with this phone, we got a 5000 mAh battery that supports 18-watt fast charging, so not only are we going to get tons of battery life throughout the day and down the road in terms of longevity, but we also get some good fast charging here. So if you don't usually have a lot of time to charge up your phone, this is definitely going to come in handy. In addition to this, the Blue F91 5G also does have NFC, so if you like to make mobile contactless payments, then you'll be happy to know that with this phone, you won't have a problem. So in general, if you're looking for a 5G phone that has a real good processor, a large display, a nice camera setup, and a good amount of useful, cool features all around, then the Blue F91 5G is going to be a great choice for you. Up next, we got the Samsung Galaxy A13 5G. Now this phone seems to be a favorite on my channel. Pretty much everyone who gets it ends up liking it, and I do think it's a pretty good phone myself. With this phone, we're getting a 6.5-inch PLS TFT display with a 90Hz refresh rate, a resolution of 720p, a PPI of 270, an aspect ratio of 20:9, and a screen to body ratio of around 81.1%. So this phone does have a good display. Sure, it's only 720p, but despite this, I do think it looks pretty good. And to kind of make up for this, we do have a 90Hz refresh rate, which is going to make the movement on the screen a little bit faster and smoother. So if you're doing something like watching a video, playing a game, or even just navigating through the phone in general, all the motion on the screen is going to be a little bit faster and smoother, and you're going to get a more premium experience overall. In addition to this, the colors also do look pretty nice, and at 6.5 inches, despite not being the largest phone out there, I do think 6.5 inches is still a pretty good size for a display. You're still going to get the benefits of having a larger display, and at the same time, the phone won't be too big, so it for sure won't be uncomfortable in your pocket. So in general, while still having some things that could be better, I do think for what it is, the display on this phone is really nice. Now for storage, we're getting 64GB of internal storage with microSD card expansion, so while it's not as much as some phones out there, it's still a pretty good amount, and for the average user, you're probably never going to have to worry. And even if you're a power user, remember there is microSD card expansion, which is something that higher end phones typically don't have. So unless you have 50GB of apps or something like that, you're probably still not going to have to worry about storage. Now for security features, this phone does have both face unlock and a fingerprint scanner located right here on the power key, and the fingerprint scanner is real fast and responsive. Definitely no issues here. For the camera setup, we got a water drop notch for the front facing camera. This camera is 5 megapixels. Then on the back, we got a triple camera setup with a 50 megapixel main camera, a 2 megapixel macro camera, and a 2 megapixel depth sensing camera. So unfortunately there's no ultra wide camera here, but I will say this phone does take some pretty decent photos. So if you're taking pictures every now and then for stuff like social media, something like that, with a 50 megapixel camera, you're gonna have no issues there. For video, this phone has a max quality of 1080p in both the rear and front cameras, so no 4K or anything like that. But for what it is, I would say it does get the job done. Now for the processor, this phone is getting 4GB of RAM with the MediaTek Dimensity 700 5G processor. I ran a Geekbench 5 benchmark test on this phone, and we got a single core score of 466 and a multi-core score of 1113. So definitely not bad, but depending on what phone you have, this phone may or may not really be an upgrade. So what I would recommend doing, and this really goes for all of these phones, is running a Geekbench 5 benchmark test on your current device and comparing your scores to all of these, because that's really the only way you're going to tell whether or not any of these phones is actually an upgrade. But that being said, in general, if you're looking for something with a ton of processing power that's really fast, and you're doing lots of heavy gaming and stuff like that, then this phone is probably going to have some trouble, and a lot of these other phones might be a better choice. But if you're just doing more normal activities like social media, web browsing, stuff like that, then the Samsung Galaxy A13 5G is going to be perfectly fine and it will get the job done. For the battery with this phone, just like the Blue F91 5G, the Samsung Galaxy A13 5G does have a 5000 mAh battery, so same kind of thing, we're getting a lot of battery life here, both throughout the day and down the road in terms of longevity. So if you have a more mobile lifestyle where battery life is really important to you, then this phone is going to be a great choice. And in addition to this, of course, the 15-watt fast charging never hurts. So if you do want to charge up your phone a little bit faster and save some time, then this fast charging, with the right fast charger of course, is really going to make a difference. Just like the previous phone, the Samsung Galaxy A13 5G also does have NFC. So again, if you do want to use those tap and pay features, stuff like Google Pay, Samsung Pay, Amex Pay, all that, then this phone will have no trouble there. And up next, we got the Samsung Galaxy A32 5G. Now this phone is pretty similar to the A13 5G, except it is a little bit of a step up. And if you happen to be familiar with the A33 5G, this phone, as the name suggests, is the predecessor. So with the A32 5G, we're getting a 6.5-inch TFT display with a resolution of 720p, a PPI of 270, an aspect ratio of 20:9, and a screen to body ratio of about 81.6%. So like I said, pretty similar to the A13 5G, and for the most part, despite again just being 720p and not 1080p, I do think this display does look really good, and if you're doing any kind of content consumption, while it might not be the best out there, it still is going to give you a pretty good experience. For storage, this phone is getting 128GB of internal storage, but keep in mind there's an annoyingly large amount of variants out there. But in general, this phone, which is the international version, does have 128GB. I do believe you can also get a 128GB version from Samsung unlocked, but there's also a 64GB version, which is the one most US carriers have. So just keep this in mind. If you do want 128 gigabytes and your carrier doesn't have it, then you can always get an international version. It's really not that hard. I got this one specifically on eBay. But regardless, even though 128 gigabytes is definitely a much better amount of storage, especially for power users, even 64 gigabytes is still pretty good. If you're an average user, you're probably not even going to need any more than that. So in general, I do think the Samsung Galaxy A32 5G, regardless of the variant, is going to have a good amount of storage. And again, remember there is microSD card expansion here, so if you need to offload stuff like photos and videos, you can always do that. Now for security features, like pretty much all these phones, this phone does have both a fingerprint scanner and face unlock. With this phone, the fingerprint scanner is right here on the power key, real fast and responsive, and like so many other phones, it's a real convenient spot. And no issues here at all. You'll easily be able to get into your phone with it. And if you don't want to use the fingerprint scanner, don't forget there is face unlock as well, so we get two options here. For the camera setup, we got a water drop notch for the front facing camera, and this camera is 13 megapixels. Then on the back, we got a quad camera setup with a 48 megapixel main camera, an 8 megapixel ultra wide camera, a 2 megapixel depth sensing camera, and a 5 megapixel macro camera. So this camera setup is pretty much just like the A13 5G, except it has a few more features. So if you want an ultra wide camera and just better photo quality in general, I do think the Samsung Galaxy A32 5G is a solid step up. And to add to this point, for video, this phone can shoot 4K in the rear camera and 1080p in the front. So if you like the Samsung Galaxy A13 5G, but you want to be able to record 4K videos, then the Samsung Galaxy A32 5G is going to be a great choice for you. And I want to take that one step further and say this is the only phone out of all of these that can record 4K videos. So if you're recording a lot of videos and you want a higher resolution, then the Samsung Galaxy A32 5G is going to be the best choice here. Now for the processor, this phone is getting 6GB of RAM with the MediaTek Dimensity 720 5G processor. Now keep in mind, depending on what variant you get, you can also get this phone with 4GB of RAM or 8GB of RAM, but this specific one again only has 6GB of RAM, so keep that in mind. Now like all these, I did run a Geekbench 5 benchmark test here, and we came back with a single core score of 491 and a multi-core score of 1664, so real good here. As far as what you're going to be doing with this phone, you can pretty much do anything with it. I've been mainly using it for social media and then streaming content like videos and music, but you can also do a decent amount of gaming on it. Would I play something like Fortnite or Call of Duty on it? Probably not. Now that's not to say it can't do it, because I know it can, but if you really want to do higher end gaming, there are definitely better phones out there for that. But in general, if you want a good amount of processing power for more normal activities like web browsing and social media, the A32 5G is not going to disappoint. For the battery, this phone does have a 5000 mAh battery that supports 15-watt fast charging, so it's the same configuration as the A13 5G, which is not really very surprising, but that's also not a bad thing because 5000 mAh is a great size for a battery, pretty much the largest smartphone battery you can get, on the US market at least, so you're not going to go wrong there. And again, the 15-watt fast charging really doesn't hurt either, so that's yet another thing that's great about this phone. Just like the previous two phones, the Samsung Galaxy A32 5G also does have NFC, so if you're making mobile contactless payments, you won't need to worry because this phone can do it no problem. Up next, we got one for Cricket users, and this is the Cricket Dream 5G. Now when we're comparing full price to full price, this is definitely by far the cheapest phone out of all of these. And in addition to this, with Cricket's current deals, at least as of the recording of this video, if you're a new customer, you can pretty much get this phone for free. Now as a side note, I am going to be linking to all of these phones in the video description, because pricing, deals, promotions, availability, all that stuff does change pretty frequently. So by the time you're watching this video, it might be at least a little different. So definitely check that out if you really want to know. But the bottom line is, this phone is probably the most affordable out of all of these. So if you really want a 5G phone at a pretty much entry-level price, then the Cricket Dream 5G is going to be a great choice for you. Now with that being said, with this phone, we're getting a 6.82-inch LCD display with a resolution of 720p, a PPI of 263, and an aspect ratio of 20.5:9. Now I will say, as far as quality goes, the colors, sharpness of the image, and all that isn't really that impressive. I mean, it's not horrible, but I've definitely seen better, and the brightness is pretty bad too. If you're outside in the sun, for example, you're probably going to have a little bit of difficulty seeing this, especially if you're wearing sunglasses. But quality aside, one really good strong point with this display, which you can probably just tell by looking at it, is the size. At 6.82 inches, this phone is the biggest phone out of all of these, slightly bigger than the blue F91 5G, And even if you're comparing it to a flagship phone, not many are even this size. I believe the Samsung Galaxy S22 Ultra is 6.8 inches, and the iPhone 13 Pro Max is 6.7. So the point is, if you want a really large display, the Cricket Dream 5G is going to be a great choice for that. Now for the storage, this phone has 64GB of internal storage with microSD card expansion, so like a couple of the others, really usable for the average person. And then if you're a power user, you're still probably not going to have too much trouble, especially with the microSD card. Now of course, if you really want 128GB, you can do better, but considering there are plenty of phones in the price range of the Cricket Dream 5G that only have 32GB, I would say I'm pretty happy with 64. The Cricket Dream 5G also does have wireless charging. I believe it supports 10 watts, so if you do like that feature, definitely something to keep in mind. For security features, we got a fingerprint scanner right here on the back, and it's real fast and responsive. No issues here at all. Now, unlike all of these other phones, there's no face unlock with the Cricket Dream 5G, so if you do like face unlock, unfortunately, you're not getting it with this phone. But again, the fingerprint scanner is really good. No issues whatsoever, so it should still not be too bad. For the camera setup, we got another water drop notch camera. This camera is 13 megapixels. Then on the back, we got a quad camera setup with a 48 megapixel main camera, an 8 megapixel ultra wide camera, a 2 megapixel macro camera, and a 2 megapixel depth sensing camera. So just like a lot of these other phones, the Cricket Dream 5G does have pretty much all the features, but considering its price, this is a real cheap phone. I was pleasantly surprised to see it's like this. As far as the actual photo quality goes, it's not really the best per se. If you're trying to get really professional looking, vibrant photos, the Cricket Dream 5G might leave a little to be desired, especially when compared to something like the Samsung Galaxy A32 5G, for example. But at the same time, again, for what it is, it's really not bad. And if you're just taking photos for something like social media where it's not really that serious, then this camera setup is going to be perfectly fine. Now for video, it's nothing special, just your typical 1080p in both the rear and front cameras. So again, no 4K. But again, seeing that only one out of all 5 of these phones can shoot 4K videos, I don't really think it's that much of a drawback. Now internally, as far as processing power goes, the Cricket Dream 5G is getting 4GB of RAM with the MediaTek Dimensity 700 processor. On the Geekbench 5 benchmark test, we got a single core score of 545 and a multi-core score of 1666, so pretty much the same as the Blue phone and the A32 5G. Really a solid mid-range phone type of score. But again, the real impressive thing about this is really not a mid-range phone in my opinion. This is definitely more of an entry-level phone, pretty much in just about the lowest tier you can get as far as price goes. So seeing that it really competes with stuff like the Samsung Galaxy A32 5G, it's definitely impressive because this phone is not in that price range by any means. So just like with the others, if you're doing more normal activities like web browsing, social media, with this one, gaming does work surprisingly well, and then consuming content like videos, music, all that, you're gonna get a real good experience here. For the battery, this phone has a 4750 mAh battery. Like I said before, I believe it supports 10 watt fast charging. On Cricket's website, I couldn't find any specific number, but I do know from experience this phone does charge up pretty fast, so you won't need to worry about that. As far as the actual battery size goes, it's not quite as big as the rest, but at 4750 mAh, it's not small by any means. And considering a lot of entry-level phones for whatever reason don't have very big batteries, it is nice to see that this phone is actually pretty close. Just like all the others so far, the Cricket Dream 5G also does have NFC, so again, if you do want to use those tap and pay services, this phone should be completely fine for that. And then last but not least, we got the TCL 20A 5G. Now keep in mind, this is a visible phone, so if you're using any other carrier, you can kind of ignore this because this phone is not compatible with anyone else. But that being said, with this phone, we're getting a 6.52-inch LCD display with a resolution of 720p, a PPI of 269, and an aspect ratio of 20:9. So we got some pretty standard specs here, but I do want to point out that although this is just a regular LCD display like pretty much all these phones, TCL does make some pretty good LCD displays, since after all, they are mostly a TV company. They pretty much put the same technology into their phones, and as you can see, it does look really good for just a 720p LCD. The colors are real nice and vibrant, the image is decently sharp, and even though at 6.5 inches, it's not the biggest display out there, if you're consuming any kind of content, you are going to have a real good experience here. For storage, we're getting 64GB of internal storage with microSD card expansion, so not bad there. No wireless charging here, but for security features, we're getting a fingerprint scanner right here on the back. And there is face unlock as well, so like most of these phones, we do get two options here. The fingerprint scanner itself does work really well, super fast and responsive, so take a look. There we go. And as you can see, no issues whatsoever, so unlocking this phone is pretty easy and convenient. For the camera setup here, we got a water drop notch on this phone, which you can't really see because of the background. And this camera is 13 megapixels. Then on the back, we got a triple camera setup with a 16 megapixel main camera, a 5 megapixel ultra wide camera, and a 2 megapixel macro camera. So pretty good setup here. Despite only being a triple camera, I still don't think it's missing any features, because while it doesn't have a depth sensing camera, you still can take some pretty good portrait photos here, so you're not really missing out. For photo quality, it's definitely not bad by any means, so if you're taking a few photos here and there for social media, something like that, the TCL 20A 5G will get the job done just fine. For video, again, this phone can only shoot in 1080p in both the rear and front cameras, so no 4K here, but the video quality for what it is pretty decent. For the processor, we're getting 4GB of RAM with the Qualcomm Snapdragon 480 5G processor. On Geekbench 5, we got a single core score with this phone of 523 and a multi-core score of 1773. So this phone is a little bit faster than the rest. Now, as far as performance goes, you're probably not going to notice the difference too much, but if you're doing slightly higher end activities like mobile gaming, for example, or if you're just on your phone a lot, maybe on social media, something like that, having a little more processing power is not going to be a bad thing. Now for the battery, this phone actually is the smallest out of all of these with a 4500 mAh battery. And while this isn't really that bad compared to a 5000 mAh battery, of course, it is going to be a noticeable difference. So if battery life is a top priority for you, you might want to think about this. But at the same time, independently, a 4500 mAh battery again is really not bad. So under most circumstances, battery life still isn't going to be a problem here. Now, one pretty big drawback about this phone in my opinion is that there's no NFC. So if you do want to use contactless mobile payment services, then unfortunately with this phone you can't do that. In general, this phone doesn't really have too many advantages over any of the other ones, but I do think it has one of the better looking displays here, and also, like I said before, the processing power is a little bit better as well. But those were 5 of my favorite 5G phones you can get in 2022 for less than $250. Now when it comes to which one is the best, that's really going to be subjective, because of course, in addition to all of them having their own strengths and weaknesses, not all of these phones are available on every carrier, so depending on what your situation is, you might not have the same options. Now this was really a high level overview of all of these phones, and there are lots of other little details you're probably going to want to know before buying them. So if you want to learn more about any of these phones individually, be sure to check out my full reviews, tips and tricks videos, and comparisons for them on the channel. But I hope you found this video useful and informative. If you did, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button. And once again, I will be linking to all of these phones in the video description, because pricing, deals, promotions, all that stuff does change from time to time. So if you want to know the specifics, definitely check that out as well. But that's it for this video. As always, I will see you in the next one.